Stabathon. Hello and welcome to Stabathon, the only podcast with a body count. I'm Ryan.
I'm Will.
And I'm Steven.
And if you didn't catch the last episode, what we do here is we discuss horror movies in depth. And so this week, we picked a movie that I think is very underrated, a movie that doesn't get it talked about enough, Oculus. Now, there's probably a few people out there like, what the fuck is Oculus? Because I'm sure... I mean, it was...
I do feel like it kind of flew under the radar for a couple.
It kind of did. Like, I feel like when it first came out, there was like a lot of... Like, I still remember the trailers, and I remember people talking about it, but I feel like it's been forgotten, which kind of pisses me off. But I think of, like, all those haunted house movies, those James Wan-type movies that came out in the 2010s, I feel like Oculus is the one that got forgotten, and I think that sucks because I think it's the best.
It got forgotten, but it also got it right.
Yeah, I really feel, especially now, like, I've seen this movie a couple times since I first saw it last year. I actually hadn't seen it up until then, and I just, like, picked it up at Walmart for $5, thinking, $5, if it sucks, I'm not going to be too mad. And I really ended up enjoying it, and the last couple months, I watched it, at least, I think this is the third time, and I love it every single time I watch it. Like, it does have its flaws, I think. Every movie does. But I think it's a movie that it deserves so much more credit than it receives.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, I spoke with you guys before we even did this movie saying that I didn't really enjoy it the first time I saw it. And I'll be honest, after just watching it now, I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Because I think it was just the fact that, like, I wasn't really old enough to appreciate the intricacies.
And I do want to say right now, like, I don't want to sound pretentious or anything, but the movie is really cerebral. And I kind of have to wonder if it is such a strange structure. Like, it is really out there. Like, it's not conventional at all. And I have to wonder if part of the reason why it was forgotten so quickly is if it was because it just went over people's heads. Yeah. I wonder. Because I feel like that happens sometimes. Like, for general audiences, sometimes they just see a movie, they go into it expecting something, I don't want to say stupid, but something a lot more simple.
Right, and I think before we jump into the movie, we should kind of talk about that, because I feel like a lot of horror movies are marketed incorrectly.
Yeah, because I remember the previews for this movie when I saw them back in 2012 or 13. I think it was my senior year of high school.
Yeah, it definitely. The movie I think came out in 2013.
Yeah.
So probably leading like the end.
So I remember the trailers, and I remember watching it thinking, because this was a day and age when I would still go to see a horror movie no matter what. I was a lot less snobbish about horror movies. But I remember seeing the trailers and thinking, yeah, it looks kind of like every other haunted house movie that's come out in the past 3 years. But I never went to see it because it just kind of flew under my radar. Like, I wanted to, but I just didn't get to it. It wasn't that important. And so...
And then you waited 3 years.
Yeah, then I waited 3 years, and I'm like, man, this is really good. It really deserves so much more credit.
All right, and I think that's the perfect way to segue into...
into the film itself. So, the villain of this movie is a mirror.
Right.
Like that.
It does sound very... almost too psychological.
It does kind of seem like art housey.
Yeah,
almost in a way. Or else it kind of sounds like one of those Stephen King short stories where you hear the premise and you're like, okay, Stephen, you need to stop you need to lay off the nose candy for a little bit. The villain of this movie is just absolutely fucking intense. But before we go into that, I want to mention the logos at the start of this movie. There are a couple things here that I think are important. First one has nothing to do with anything. It's just a weird, stupid thing that I noticed. Why did WWE produce this film?
Yeah, it was kind of...
It had nothing to do with wrestling.
I feel like they were trying to branch out more from...
Yeah, it must... Because they've done other horror movies, like See No Evil, where they actually have, like, wrestlers in the film. So they're financing the film to push the... But for some reason, this was the movie that they're like, yeah, we're going to throw our money at this.
We're going to throw our money in the ring.
Yeah. Please leave the podcast.
All right, this is my last episode, I guess.
But I do have to say, the first time I saw that, when I first saw this movie, I immediately thought, oh God, this movie's going to suck, isn't it?
It was a red flag.
It was a red flag, right? Like, that immediately I wasn't going to like this film, because it is so out there and strange that WWE would in any way finance or produce this film.
Okay, and I think that segues perfectly into my first point, because it opens with what feels like a dream sequence because it's one of the main characters, Tim, explaining to a doctor in this mental institution that he was in about this recurring dream that he keeps having, and it's about his childhood. And I mean, we'll get into it later and how it actually comes into play later in the movie, but like right from the beginning, it does a good job of putting you at the edge of your seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really throws you right off.
Oh, yeah.
Like right out of the gate, you're just like, wait, what's going on exactly?
Because you're already asking questions right from the start, and sometimes that can be the signal of a movie that it's trying to get you to ask questions.
At the very least, it's not starting out with like some prologue where like they describe where the Lasker glass came. Like they could have very easily started out with like like in the 1800s or whatever when the Lasker glass first like killed someone or like how it was created. And they don't go into the creation of the Lasker glass at all
because they didn't need to.
Right.
Because all of that is.
It's scarier if you don't know.
But it's also explained within the first act, and we'll get to that eventually.
Oh yeah.
But another thing that I thought was interesting was while he was talking with the doctor, he's talking about ways that he can help the transition from like moving into a mental institution into an actual like home.
Right.
Because he's been incarcerated for however many years. It's
been a while.
A handful of years at least. Because he was incarcerated when he was probably, 9 or 10?
12?
Was he 12?
I don't know. It just says 12 years.
Yeah.
Well,
but it's been
actually, we can work backwards because she said he was, 22, 21, 22?
Right, yeah. Okay.
So subtract 12 from that, and he was probably about 11, 12 years old.
Okay.
So.
But yeah, and so he's kind of talking about the transition, and then he kind of moves into a different territory and says it's also important for him to reconnect with his sister, which becomes a huge staple of
this movie. Largely has two characters. Like, there really has two characters that it centers around. Everything revolves around them specifically,
right?
Which I think is really cool because it really allows them to focus on these two characters and their dynamic with each other.
Another thing that kind of like raised a question for me was when Tim and Kaylee like officially like sit down and they're face to face for the first time in the movie, like, and they're talking about. Well, Kaylee specifically is talking about how she wants to go back to this house. And
before that, like, you notice as they're talking, they're having like this good friendly conversation. They're brother and sister. They're reconnecting after he was just let out of the mental institution. And immediately, the second she brings up the mirror, you can just see Tim, like, his face falls.
Right. No, the whole dynamic shifts
because he's been spending so much time forgetting or being like trying to train himself to understand that it's all a delusion. That none of what we actually thought we saw happened.
Also, one thing from the very beginning that I don't know if anyone picked up on was he dreamed of him shooting himself as a child, I believe.
I think, wasn't it his sister?
Yeah, but that was really important to the doctor as like a breakthrough because this whole time he's been picturing his dad when the doctors are trying to say, no, your dad wasn't crazy, you are.
Yeah. Which that can also kind of be foreshadowing for the end.
Yeah.
And can we talk for a minute about the foreshadowing? Because there's this
movie.
There is a ton
before we do that, I want to go into. We were just talking about how the doctor, right off the bat, him being in the mental institution is more than just like a device to start the story. I feel like because it gives him a reason and a motivation to be clinical about how he approaches the mirror. Like, you have their separate approaches. You have Kaylee's fanatical, we have to destroy the mirror, it's evil approach, and his very calm, like, there's nothing actually wrong, it's all in our heads.
Another point that I made is it almost feels like she's kind of OCD about this mirror.
Yeah.
She's very hyper-focused on it.
Because she needs people to know that it's the mirror, not them.
Right. She almost, in a way, needs closure on the whole fact that the whole childhood ordeal happened.
And I feel so bad for the brother because the second he gets out, she's like, all right, back to the mirror.
Yeah, back to the mirror. So, enough about you. Let's talk about me for a minute. We need to kill this thing.
Yeah. The second he gets out, she's like, I need your help moving this crazy mirror that killed her family.
But that was a great dynamic because in the tradition of, like, just some of the most classic horror stories, like when we were watching the movie, I brought up Edgar Allan Poe. Him being so clinical about it and having, like, all these rational explanations for it created, in the beginning at the very least, a kind of conflicting narrative. Like, you had her who was very fanatical and very much believed immediately with no question that this mirror was evil. And then on the other side you had her brother who believed that the mirror can't be evil because that's not possible. So you had them battling with each other.
And another thing that you touched on while we were watching the movie is the fact that everything that's happening has a logical explanation up to a
point. Right.
Because in the whole, I would say probably the second act of the movie is when he's trying to talk Kaylee down off of a ledge almost, because she believes wholeheartedly that the mirror is what killed
their parents. Right.
But because you had mentioned the whole way he's looking at it clinically, he has an explanation for why these things are the way they are, and she's almost bewildered by the fact that he's refusing to acknowledge what's happening.
Right.
She thinks that he's crazy for being so rational.
Yeah, and in a way, her insanity is also her rationality.
Right.
Because she knows that what she's seeing is real.
Well, also she's right.
Right.
Well, we find out.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, it wouldn't be much of a movie if she was wrong.
Right. Because then it could easily just be written off as, she was crazy the whole time.
Although that would have been an interesting twist, but I don't think it would have worked for this particular movie.
Definitely. I really like the way they kind of...
This is one of the few times in a horror movie where I feel like the insane supernatural angle worked more effectively than like the realistic psychological angle. Because like in just about any other horror movie, if they were setting it up to be like a conflict of real versus unreal in this same way, I would always side with the unreal because it's scarier to think that everything's just in your mind. But with the way this movie is structured, I wouldn't want that. Because it's just, the rest of the movie from that point on is just too damn good to just have it be like, it's all in their heads.
I agree, and I feel like that seems to be a route a lot of horror movies take nowadays.
Yeah.
Especially the ones from indie developers, because it's one of those things that, like, it's not necessarily that they didn't have an ending in mind, it's that they want to leave you asking questions, but
they want to leave you with a twist,
right?
And it just doesn't work.
Right. To kind of segue back into the movie, I had talked about reasons why I think I originally didn't like it, and I think it's because during the first act there's like a 15-minute scene where she's explaining,
it's basically just talking.
Right, it's her explaining the rules of the mirror.
Not just the rules, but the history.
Right.
Like, it's just this really long passage where she's holding up pictures and talking about them, but it really works because, first off, she's so impassioned about what she's saying. It's not just like, in 1832... this meant like,
and I feel like at the same time her dialogue was paced out really well. Like she's talking fast but not too fast.
Well, and it gets faster as time. Like she gets more frantic, especially as Tim asks her questions. You know, he'll be like, "What about?" He asks about the couch. Like they bought a couch at a certain time, and
at
like,
a certain point, she starts to ignore him and just keep going.
Yeah, she's like, "Can I continue?" And then she like gets faster and faster. Like she's just gotta get more frantic until eventually he pushes her buttons to the point where she's like, "All right, let's get to it." And she starts talking about their parents.
It's almost as though she thinks the more pictures and she talks about it, the more he'll start to believe it.
Right. And he's not going to believe it until he actually sees it, which he does, which was a really brilliant scene, I thought.
But a good thing about the foreshadowing, which we
I do want to get back to the foreshadowing.
One foreshadowing that I think Ryan mentioned was the stain on the father's shirt.
The juice box, yeah, because, that scene...
Well, and I feel like before we jump into that, we kind of need to talk about how there's almost two separate narratives going on at the start, because there's the past and the present.
Yeah, the way this movie is structured, just to kind of give a little overview of how this film is structured if you haven't seen it, and if you haven't seen it, you probably shouldn't be listening to this, because we're going to spoil everything in it. But the way that it's structured, which I think is probably the most brilliant thing about the movie, it's easily, like, the thing that makes it for me. It starts out, you have the past and the present, and they're very much separate. There's a wall between them. You know when you're in the past because of like who's involved and how the house looks, and you know when you're in the present because of, you know, how old the characters are, and it's very obvious that they're two different things. As the movie progresses, that wall blurs to the point where it completely disappears, and past and present are not only moving through each other, they're interacting with each other.
And I thought that worked really well because there's contrast in this movie, and I think that contrast works really well to set you on edge. But I also like that wall was a hard wall at the start,
and then it's gone
and
at the end.
As time moves on, that wall becomes thinner and thinner, and it just continues to break down until it's almost impossible.
There's absolutely nothing left
to
of it.
keep up with it.
And that movie would not have worked if they just did it right from the start.
No, it wouldn't have. But the thing is, like, that it succeeds in two levels. One, because it's a great way to tell like the past and present storyline. I feel like if they did like just the past storyline and then the present storyline separate from one another, it would have been terrible. It would have been too clunky.
Right.
I feel like if they kept that wall up through the entire film, it would have been too standard or traditional. It would have lost a lot of what made it special. But at the same time, it treats time itself as a non-linear concept.
Yeah.
It's, it starts to loop back in on itself, and it starts to interact with itself, and it starts to change.
Time almost as parallel.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have that hard wall at the beginning where you can tell the difference between the two. And it's almost like those two parallel timelines are getting closer together
until eventually they merge.
They merge and become one. And I thought that was a really cool way to kind of play with the psychology of the audience.
It really throws you so off balance. Like, part of what makes this movie scary is the imagery, but I think part of it is just the entire time you can't get your footing. You can't get any purchase. Like, when you think you're finally scrambling up the wall, all of a sudden you slide back down.
Right. It was amazing. So, to get into what you had mentioned with the foreshadowing and the wound that you saw.
I just want to talk about that scene. Like, that's one of my favorite scenes in the film, because it's so subtly creepy.
And I think we also need to talk about kind of the storyline leading up to that point, because the whole idea is the family's moving into a new home.
Right.
And they have a bunch of old antiques that they had purchased over the years.
That was one thing that bothered me about this movie, was they did say that, like, oh, we wanted the antiques, but they never explained why they specifically wanted the Lasser glass in their house. It just kind of was.
I mean...
And at the same time, I feel like it's not crucial.
It's not crucial. No. It's just, it's kind of something like, well...
Why this specifically?
Right.
And why...
I think I can make up an
office.
answer off and just bullshit it myself.
Yeah.
Because, like, if the glass is sentient, like we're led to believe, and it controls people's senses.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and at the same time...
But I like to believe that...
Well, and before you jump into that, I do want to say that this movie... It throws you into the action really quick, so the pacing of the movie is very metered out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's moving so quickly from point to point that you don't really have a chance to ponder why that mirror.
Right.
You think it originally because it's like, yeah, why this mirror specifically? But then all of a sudden the story just starts moving, and it becomes lost.
I mean, I do like to think that it's not necessarily that the mirror was calling to them. I like to think that this is something that could happen to anybody. That
They
just by picking up the mirror,
right.
They saw the mirror, they happened to like it, and they picked it up, and then it killed them. Yeah. And I think that's infinitely more terrifying than, the mirror spoke to them specifically. I think it's just kind of like you go to the store.
Because why would it pick them?
You go to a store, you pick up an orange, and then all of a sudden you take that orange home, and like 10 days later it murders you. And like, that's more terrifying than just like...
happen.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Killer fucking oranges.
And I think the whole idea of, like, when the movers are moving it into the father's study, I guess you could call it. It's almost like his
office. He calls it his office.
He refers to it as his office. And they put it up on his wall. It's kind of setting up his journey into insanity. Mm-hmm. It really starts when one night he gets up out of bed, if I remember correctly, and he walks downstairs.
Well, he went to get like a drink or something, so he got like a juice box because that's what they had. And as he walks, and this is a really great scare because it's not a jump scare per se, because there was no like loud whoosh like right in your face.
Right.
It was really kind of subtle. He's just walking by, and all of a sudden you see a woman behind him with like mirrors over her eyes, which is a recurring theme in this movie and probably the scariest visual of this whole film.
And I'll be honest, it took me a while to realize that they were mirrors.
They were mirrors,
not just glowing.
Yeah,
that's what I thought originally.
Yeah, but when they get really close, you can see the reflection in it. Yeah. You're like, oh, that's a fucking mirror.
Yeah, but like he sees that, and then he doesn't really notice it.
Oh, not at all.
He just kind of he gets kind of out of the corner of his eye, but we see it in like full view, so it's scary. Right. There's no music, there's no sound. It's just there, and then when he looks back, it's gone.
And before we jump in, we're gonna get to your point eventually.
Yeah, we keep dancing around it.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep.
There's just so much to talk about.
It's the nature of this movie.
I know what you're gonna say, and I feel like I totally agree.
Yeah, because I don't know, man. Like this movie, there's so many plot points.
There's so much to unpack. Yeah,
so many things.
Are we gonna talk about the sound and how there's like no music?
The no music, because I feel like there's a correlation between a scary movie and a scary soundtrack, but I feel like it's more effective for a horror movie to have a lack of a soundtrack.
We talked about this in the Nightmare on Elm Street episode, our last episode. Yes. And I mean, the music in this movie is far less iconic the nightmare. Like, it doesn't really at any point, like, strike you as anything.
And it's almost not noticeable.
It's in the back. It's just ambient noise mostly, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that really works to enhance the story.
This movie has such incredible atmosphere.
Oh, absolutely.
I think.
Right from the beginning, too.
Yeah.
And so, to finally get to your point...
yeah, he, like, walks into his office.
And was he looking at his dad? I don't quite remember how
I can't
the scene
exactly
played
remember.
out. He kind of notices something out of the corner of his eye in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And... He looks at his shirt and there's like
a stain in the mirror. Yeah, in the mirror he sees there's a stain, and then he looks down and it's like he spilled the juice box on him. But like when you look at that stain and you don't realize it the first time you see it, but you realize it after you know how the story ends, that it resembles a gunshot wound in his chest.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
foreshadowing.
Which is how, spoiler alert, he dies at the end.
Yeah.
He gets shot, or not at the end. I mean, the time is so fucked up in this movie. I can't, like, say the end or the beginning.
No, yeah, it is very difficult.
But in the end of the film, it's how
times.
we see him die. Is he not only does he get shot in the chest, but he helps his son to shoot him in the chest to save his children.
Right in the spot where the juice.
Right in the spot where the juice was like stained and like dripping down.
Which I never noticed at first, but
yeah, neither did I.
It was a really cool foreshadow.
And I think it's also important to talk about, because obviously this movie is focused on a mirror, it's important to talk about reflections. Mm-hmm. Because, and we kind of already touched on this, the way the movie quote-unquote ends is with the father being shot, but at the same time there's the mirror of it ending the way it began. Mm-hmm. Because it starts with Tim's dream of that happening.
Right.
But you don't know that it was his father that he shot.
Right.
Just because in his dream it was somebody else. It was his sister, right? It
right.
was Kaylee.
Yeah, in his dream.
Which is a big foreshadow as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The foreshadowing in this movie was really quite incredible.
It
was subtle, but it was like
there was also
intense.
a really great moment when they first walk into the room and Tim sees that there's like this gash in the wall, and you have no idea what that gash is until you actually see the anchor, and you're like, Like, it's one of those movies where you see little things and you connect the dots as you go. Everything in the beginning of the movie has a purpose. Nothing is there accidentally or arbitrarily. It connects to something at the end, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because it did an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to talk about the mirror itself, because I took most of my notes on that.
On the mirror.
Right. And I feel like we all took notes on different things.
Right.
Yeah.
We all had something that really interested us, and we all took notes specifically on that. Mine always happens to be the more supernatural aspect, and I loved the mirror in this because...
Yeah.
It wasn't like a villain like Freddy, where it's like, I'm gonna gash you with my claws.
It's such a simple, effective thing.
Right.
That, like...
Well, because the mirror itself is almost playing on the paranoia of the characters in a way.
It is, yeah.
Because paranoia is not a huge factor in this. It's more about their journey through the past.
I think what's genius about it is that when you look into a mirror, what you're seeing is an opposite... You know, the reflection is opposite of what the world actually is. It's a different perspective. Mm-hmm. It's a different perception. And what the mirror does is it fucks with your perception of the world around you.
Of course.
It makes you think you're seeing one thing when in reality you're seeing something else.
Yeah.
Which brings me into my point of what I observed wasn't just like visual, but the mirror actually seems to control, and it like not just like fuck up where you just see random things, but it specifically controls things of all five senses.
Right.
People here have heard voices. When she bites into the light bulb, she feels the pain of the light bulb.
Even though it's not actually a light bulb.
Right. They hear the voices on the phone. Of course, they see things. Yeah, they feel things. They have all five of the senses.
No, they don't. I don't think they taste anything. But so that 4 out of 5 ain't bad, because I don't think...
No, the blood, probably, from biting into the light bulb.
Yeah, but I feel like that... Possible.
Yeah, I definitely think that kind of plays into their paranoia.
Well, and it gets worse as it goes on, because it's explained that the mirror draws energy from the living things around it.
Right.
That's why there's a prevalence of dead plants throughout, in certain areas.
Well, dead plants, dead animals, then dead people. Like
because this mirror can't just operate on itself. It has like a power source, which is other living creatures.
Right. And I like that in the beginning, they defined what the mirror is capable of, so that even when it's doing this crazy shit, you're never like, wait, when could it do that?
Right.
Like, you know it can do... As long as it's messing with your perception of the world around you. You know it can do just about anything as long as it has energy from the things around it.
Right.
And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but the thing I loved about the mirror was that it was a very arbitrary evil. It wasn't explained that this thing had the devil in it, or that it was cursed, or that there was like an evil spirit inside of it in any way. It was just, this thing is somehow evil, and we don't know why, but it is. And I think that's more frightening because anything could be like that. Like anything old could be, you know, the Lasser glass, you know?
That's another interesting contrast, I think, because that's one that I actually never even wrote notes on, because I found a lot of contrasts in this movie.
Well, I mean,
but there's the fact that the mirror is old.
Yeah.
Like old.
Yeah.
From like 1800.
Yeah, probably even older than that.
No, it was old. There was like 17 something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was like 1777. I don't remember the exact year. But there's the old and the new. There's sanity and insanity. There's reality versus what's not real.
What's not real. Yeah.
So there's just such a contrast between not only these concepts, but also the characters in a way. Because there was the one scene where there's I don't remember who was standing on which side, but Tim and Kaylee are standing looking at their
Well, it was
father.
Kaylee on the right and Tim on the left.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
I thought Kaylee was on the right. And there's just the almost environmental storytelling, because there's a light above each of their heads, Tim and Kaylee on either side. Kaylee's side, the light is off, but on Tim's, the light is on. And I know that you said that both of them ended up turning off in the end, but overall I feel like that was also telling the story of like Kaylee hasn't quite realized what she's gotten into just yet.
Yeah, that's I also feel like that is, it's so undefined,
right?
That
and
it's
almost too subtle.
I can't agree with you on that, just because I don't know if that was I mean, it feels like it was done purposefully,
or almost the opposite, because she seems to know exactly what she's into, but he's denying it. And when the light turns off, he's like, "Whoa, what the fuck? This thing's real."
Right.
Yeah,
that could be it too.
Right.
It could be.
I feel like we could debate that for hours.
Yeah,
and it could be that she was doomed, so her light was off, and he had hope. But at the end, you know that he goes back to the hospital or whatever.
Yeah, and that could have even been foreshadowed.
And so the light was on for most of the scene, and then it went off at the very last second of the scene.
Because he was pretty hopeful that thing was not real.
Yeah.
Up until she proved it.
Yeah.
Well, and he thought he won at the end when he's like, all right, fuck it, I'm just gonna hit the thing, and it hits Kaylee right in the neck and kills her.
Right,
the anchor,
anvil,
that kills her. So it could be that he has hope that he could beat the mirror until the very end of the movie, and that could be why the light stayed on and went off at the very end of the scene.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's such an arbitrary sequence.
Right.
It feels like it's done on purpose, but at the same time, it's also likely that it wasn't.
Right.
So I can't conclusively say, yeah, you're right, or no, or yeah, I think you're right, and no, I think you're wrong.
Right.
And she comes to this house ungodly prepared to deal with this mirror.
She's been spending 12 years.
At least 12 years.
Because you remember at the end, when Tim's taking away, she's yelling at him, remember our promise, remember our promise. So she's been planning this out
since she was
her
a
entire
child.
life, pretty much.
She had 4 Apple computers, which I can't imagine how much that would have cost.
Well, I mean, you also have to consider what she was doing.
She also had like a really good job at an auction house. Her fiance was
multiple LED lights all around the house for when the power goes out.
Multiple cameras.
Yeah, multiple cameras. She had food stocked up. She had all these timers.
She had alarm clocks with the worst fucking alarm ever.
She's basically a doomsday prepper.
For the fucking last.
Think about this though. No matter how much she prepared, the mirror still won.
Yeah. You can't.
No, yeah.
I think that was the most effective thing about this movie is that you can't beat the mirror.
You can't prepare for the unpreparable.
You can't fight your own perception.
Right.
Because that's what the mirror uses against you.
Because throughout the movie, she's always like, well, if the mirror does this will happen. Like, the anchor's going to fall and smash it. Well, the mirror's like, well, fuck you. I'm going to put you in front of me instead.
It found a way around every precaution.
It used her as a human shield instead.
Yeah.
It also plays with the concept of freedom in a way, because the mirror has this ability to basically lock you down in this house.
Yeah.
You are stuck in this house.
It does create a really claustrophobic atmosphere.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
even though you could, so you could just leave the house. Like, that's how a lot of haunted house movies are. It's like, well, why don't they just get out of the house? Well, when they try to get out of the house, they get pulled back in.
Right.
Or they think they're out of the house, but they've never actually moved
left the house
from their original spot.
Right. But here's the one thing you could say the mirror is weak at, it cannot control physical space. Mm-hmm. So when the father was shot and he flew into the mirror, it cracked.
Yeah.
Because it can't defend against real physical attacks.
Right. So it does have a weakness, but the characters just weren't strong enough to exploit that. And last episode, when we were talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, I was talking about how I hated the sequels because I felt like they ruined the story of the first one by adding to it and adding too much to it. Oculus, as of right now, does not have a sequel.
Yeah.
I pray to God that it never has a sequel.
Yeah.
It has the perfect ending, and I feel like if it had a sequel, it would ruin it.
Well, and it's going to explain it into the ground.
Yeah, they're gonna exposit too much, and that's what I said earlier when I said that the mirror was a very arbitrary evil. Right. I feel like that's important because so many movies go way too far to explain their monsters. Like I said, it could have had a prologue in the beginning where they explain how the Lasser glass came to be, but they didn't because it's not important.
Right.
So many modern horror movies do that. Like, they explain what is going on, what is in the house, what is in the object that's haunting.
Starting off on that foot usually ends up alienating the audience because it's like, why do I care?
It stops being scary when you know.
Right. And before you jump into that, I do kind of want to touch on this because we had talked about foreshadowing. Mm-hmm. And you know the moment where the mother, I can't remember what her actual name was.
Marie.
Was it Marie?
I think so.
Okay.
Marie or Maria.
But she goes into the office and obviously she's kind of dealing with the fact that her husband is going crazy. Mm-hmm. He's starting to kind of almost retreat into himself in a way, kind of keeping things to himself rather than sharing with the family. And she loses it and like knocks everything off of his desk. And that broken picture of the family with the frame, that was foreshadowing into the fact that the family becomes broken.
Yeah, well, that's pretty simple foreshadowing, I think. But yeah, it is true. Like, by the end of it, there's only one of them left alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, even from the point where Tim was arrested originally when he was a child, because that family would no longer be the same. They were
a very happy, picturesque family in the beginning, and then at the end of it, they're obviously... And that's a recurring theme in a lot of horror movies, I think.
Yeah, most definitely.
Like the broken family dynamic.
For sure.
Yeah. Another thing about the mirror was it took people that it, like... I don't want to say possessed because that's too literal.
It didn't possess them. It more like acquired them.
Right. I would say manipulated.
Manipulated.
It takes the people that it manipulates and leads them down different kinds of psychological roads.
Yeah. It uses like their insecurities against them.
Right. Like the father, he becomes almost like a zombie.
He's like kind of like a cold, calculating psychopath who can't feel anything anymore.
Because throughout the movie, in the past, when they show that, he's just like ignoring the kids, just kind of.
Well, and I think that's also too important to note that the mirror's in his office.
Yeah,
the area where he spends a lot of his time.
He's the most affected by it
because he's closest to it, and I think that's important to note.
The father deals with these things in a different way too. Like he rips off his fingernails.
Oh god, that fucking scene kills me.
Yeah,
it's so gross.
The mom becomes like a feral ghoul,
ripping out her own teeth.
Who self-mutilates in a different way
with a broken plate.
Yeah, it's a different form of insanity because she's lost her mind,
and
she's no longer there.
He still has it, but it's not
there.
Right.
I think that has to do with his distance from the mirror because he's right next to it for most of the movie.
Well, I think the mirror's also maybe twisting them to serve its own means. Like the father being like the cold, calculating psychopath, and her being like what you said, the feral ghoul. It's kind of like the master and his attack dog. Now it has like its own agents.
He did chain her up like
a dog, and then at the end of it, he sicked her on his children like a dog.
Right, and she even crawled on all fours like an animal.
Several times. Yeah,
I really like that.
The other thing I want to bring up about the parents that I think is really important is how at the end both times they try to kill their children and both times they're unable, even though they're controlled by they're completely controlled by the mirror at this point. Katie Sackhoff's character was Marie. I can't remember exactly. It's one of those two.
It's something like that.
But she was strangling her daughter, and the only reason that Kaylee survived is because she couldn't kill her. Like there was some part of her still in the back of her mind.
Right.
So she let go, and then the father shot her. But at the end, when he had the gun on them. He was trying to kill Kaylee. He didn't. Tim came down with the golf club, smacked the gun out of his hand, and picked it up. And as he had him, like, at the end of the gun there, he didn't just, like, mock him or, like, are you going to shoot me or whatever. He actually grabbed Tim's hands. He put him up to his chest, and he was the one who pulled the trigger.
Right.
Tim's finger was on the trigger, but it was the dad who
pushed his finger.
Who ultimately made the choice.
So both parents were tasked with killing their children, essentially, but were unable to at the end of it.
Yeah,
which I think is a really important thing.
I think that I don't know if that necessarily has anything to do with the mirror either. I feel
it's
because they know that what they're doing isn't right.
Well, I feel like within this movie, it is a really hopeless film.
Very.
But I feel like there's little glimmers of hope within it. Like what you said, there is a weakness that the mirror can't sustain itself against damage for like actual space. Here it's like the mirror can manipulate people, but it can't manipulate people so completely that they can't still potentially save the people that they're trying to hurt.
Right.
So I think that that's important to say that, yeah, this thing is evil. Yeah, they couldn't stop this thing within the movie, but it is possible that this thing could be stopped. And I think that's just another way of making you wonder, well, what could have happened or what could happen in the future? And it's another reason why I don't want a fucking sequel to this movie ever.
And that's
because I don't want to know. I want to think about it.
It kind of segues perfectly into my next point because there's a certain amount of uneasiness, I'll say, in I'd say probably Act 2, like the midway point of the movie, where there's sudden jump cuts between the present and the past.
It's where the line starts blurring between them.
Right, and I think that lends itself to the horror elements of this movie because it's really hard to get your bearings in that segment because you're all of a sudden jumping from past to present,
like I said,
and back again.
You can't get any purchase. Like just when you think you've got it, it forces it out of your grasp.
It's like somebody coming up and pulling the rug out from under you.
And it's changing, so you can't get used to what it's doing.
Right.
Because at first it's just like the obvious, it's past, present, there's the wall there. Towards the second half, what they'll do is they'll show an image on the screen and then it'll relate to something in the past.
Right.
So it'll jump back really quickly just when you don't realize it.
Right.
And so you're just getting used to there being that wall there. Now all of a sudden that wall is blurring. And now you're trying to grasp onto the fact that the past and the present are starting to fuse. And as they fuse more and more, you're just losing your grasp the further you go.
And at one point when the power goes out in the home, because the electricity she knew would go out, and that's why she had those LED lamps to set up, there's a moment where she's walking up the stairs. And then from the past, you can
see
Tim walking down the stairs, and there's that contrast of the direction that they're going.
But they pass each other. Like it's not even like she goes off the screen and he comes down.
Right. It's that they pass each other on that hallway, and you can see they're going in different directions.
Well, and then there's also a moment when older Tim walks into a room and sees his younger self, and the two of them look at each other and notice each other.
And they make eye contact, which I thought was important because they're acknowledging that the past exists and so does the present, and there's a connection there. And I'm really glad that they followed through on that, because as time goes on, you start to realize that contrast eventually leads to them merging together. Which I thought was really well handled. They did an amazing job with making sure that their young counterparts were doing almost the exact same action that they were doing, if not the exact same action.
It kind of, and I almost hate to make this comparison, because I'm probably going to end up beating this dead horse in the next few months, but it kind of reminds me of It, how in the book at least, there is something similar that's done, and I think maybe it's just because I love that book so much that I really loved it to see it in this movie. But you do have that blurring of past and present where they start out very separate and then they kind of fuse together towards the end. I just think that's a really effective storytelling device, and it's a really effective way to show the past but not talk about the past, because a lot of movies, they don't understand, or I don't want to say they don't understand, but they don't take advantage of the show don't tell rule. Film is a visual medium. It needs to show what it's doing rather than telling. If it were a book, telling is fine. You have to tell. But a film is visual, so it's better to show it without any dialogue than to beat your audience over the head with dialogue. And I think the movie does a really good job of that. It doesn't force you to speculate what happened in the past. It doesn't force you to sit through lengthy conversations between Tim and Kaylee about, when mom and dad died, blah, 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 blah. They don't talk about their parents dying much in this film. I mean,
because they're showing you.
Right, they talk about it, they bring it up, but they don't talk about the specifics because the specifics are shown within the film.
Yeah, because they already know what happened. They don't have to explain it to each other.
And I hate that in movies when, a character will say something to another character that they both know, and it's just solely for the sake of
the audience.
Yeah. They're saying it almost because they know that there's somebody watching them on the other side of the screen.
And it kind of breaks that
illusion. It's like, wait, why are you saying this to him? He knows that. And they don't do that at all in this movie, and I really like that.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to notice that you had brought this point up while we were watching, but they're reliving their past traumas while also developing new ones.
Yeah, and they're comparing those traumas to what was happening in the past.
Definitely.
Especially because, like I said, they would show like an image and then they would contrast it with something that happened in the past, and that just happened more and more.
One thing of foreshadowing that I mentioned earlier was when they were young kids, they would constantly play laser tag.
Oh yeah, with the toy guns.
Yeah, and that kind of seems to me like a foreshadowing that one of them's going to kill the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and like the whole prevalence of the gun at the end.
Right.
And honestly, I know you had mentioned that, but I don't know why I never wrote that part down.
Because he told us not to.
Yeah, said it would murder you.
That's right.
He yelled at us. He's like, "No, that's mine."
But
he wanted to bring that up.
Another thing about the mirror was it's super intelligent. It seems it covered its tracks.
There is an intelligence to the mirror that is really disconcerting.
Right. It was able to pin murders
Right.
on somebody.
Yeah, no one would ever believe that unless you're crazy or Kaylee, that this mirror is sentient. No one could ever possibly believe that. Not just because it's ridiculous, because there's no evidence.
Exactly.
The mirror wanted to turn the mom against the dad, so it would show the children this woman, but it would never show the mom this woman. And then she goes and sneaks into the dad's office and finds like the woman's name written down all over this piece of paper.
The woman, everybody that the mirror shows is somebody who died because of the mirror,
right.
And they get trapped within the mirror after they die.
And I think it's also important to note at the point at the very end of the movie, in terms of like the end of the film, Tim and his younger counterpart are seen sitting in the back of the cop car looking towards the window, and younger Tim only sees the parents because those were the only two that died. His sister was still fine, but she was she made that promise to him. But then when older Tim looks, he sees Kaylee with the parents.
Right.
And I thought
that was awesome.
That was a really cool sequence. And in a way, do you remember when she first uncovers the mirror in the auction house and she sees those three
statues?
That was so cool.
Honestly, it's just something I thought of because I never made that connection.
Yeah.
Until I just started talking about it. But I thought that was a really cool way to tie in
those two scenes.
Yeah, those two sequences. One towards the beginning and one at the very end. So I don't know. Honestly,
because she looks back, but they're all covered. So she's like, I don't know who these people are. And then at the end, he's like, oh fuck, that's my family.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's a ton within this movie. Like, there's the one moment when she has the nightmare, and as she lays back down to bed and her fiance is holding her, you see that her arms are crossed over her chest, kind of like Dracula in the coffin, and it very much looks like she's on her funeral bed. There's just those wonderful moments of foreshadowing in this movie that are just so subtle. Like, there's something so subtle about the storytelling in this movie, and there's something so original about the way that the supernatural elements are used. It's not the standard, like, the thing I hate, and this comes from CinemaSins, when they go over, like, a lot of supernatural ghost movies, how the ghost is always just kind of like fucking with things. Like, it'll turn on a radio or it'll like bang a door. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of making noise. So the audience knows it's there. The audience knows it's coming, and but it's innocuous. The mirror never does anything that's innocuous. Everything has its place. The plants die because it's siphoning its energy from them. The dog disappears because the mirror is siphoning energy from it. The things that people see are their own perception being warped. The mirror itself is such a sense of pure evil that you can't help but be terrified of it as you watch this film. I think that is what is so successful about the horror of this film, is that everything the mirror does has a purpose. And I think that's what a lot of horror movies miss. I posted on Facebook the other day that I'm sick of haunted house movies or like ghost movies or exorcism movies. Yeah, but it's not because they're bad; it's because they're poorly handled. If more movies were handled like Oculus, where the the monster had a reason for doing the things that it did, and those things were threatening and had a purpose, they would be so much more terrifying.
Right.
And I think that's what's so effective about this movie.
It did a really good job, and I think another thing that I was just thinking about is the fact that, in a way, the mirror is operating under the same kind of quote-unquote insanity, because it's obviously a mirror.
Well, it doesn't follow any logic.
Right, but it's almost suffering the same kind of insanity that Tim and Kaylee's father was suffering from.
Mm-hmm.
Very cold and calculated. It always knew how
Right,
things
but
were
whatever
gonna end
is
up.
in the mirror or the mirror itself is not human.
Right.
So it's probably smarter than we are.
Which brings me
Yeah.
to my point. I know no one knows for sure, and I know you didn't want to define it as like a demon or the devil or a creature. There was one thing I did notice at the very end that almost made me think it was a demon or a devil. Because at the very end, the father he says, "I've seen the devil, he is me," as he looks in the mirror.
If you notice in that scene, and I just noticed it this time, you hear like the whispering voices, and one of those voices says, "I am Satan."
Did it?
Yeah.
Really?
I just noticed it this time.
We have to go back and listen to that today because I have to hear that.
Yeah, it's like "I am Satan" or like "I'm Satan," something like that, but it says like "I am Satan."
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's necessarily literal.
Right. But it's kind of saying, I'm fucking evil.
Yeah, it's basically telling you it is true evil, and I really get that feeling from it that it is true evil.
But when he said that, "I've seen the devil, he is me," I'm like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I get it.
You see the devil in the mirror.
You're not
the-
crazy. Something's going on with you.
Well, and I feel like that isn't limited to just that character.
Right.
Because honestly, whenever a person looks into the mirror, they see another version of themselves.
With the glassy...
Right. A version of themselves that they've never seen before. And in a way, that's kind of playing into the whole psychological aspect of what's actually happening.
Because
there's a fine line between reality and what's not real.
to kind of give a visual to your point, there was a scene where the mom is looking in the mirror and she's like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And it's
right.
like looking like
Yeah,
its
it's
head is
almost-
down, but
yeah.
its eyes are looking up and its eyes are glassy, and you're like, "Oh, that's a devil. That's a demon."
No,
That's
yeah.
a monster.
And I thought that contrast was really cool. It did a lot of cool things with the reflection aspects of certain things. And that could have easily been used as a gimmick.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't. It really was used to enhance the storytelling aspects of this film.
It was one of the more heavy-handed parts of the film was when like the wave hits her and it's like, "Oh, now she's possessed."
Well, yeah.
You can tell.
Yeah.
That was more heavy-handed. Like the
But
dad
even-
just kind of gradually
but even-
gets there.
Yeah, you're right. Because it hits her, and then she attacks her children, and then the dad like
Right.
drags
She
her
first
down.
she cuts open her stomach where her C-section scar
Right,
was.
right.
And then she attacks her kids and like
Yeah,
frantic...
that is. It is. Well, and I think that came down to time.
Yeah.
Probably.
Probably. Because, I mean, they were kind of strict.
But I just wanted to point out that contrast. Like that was really heavy-handed, while the dad was more like a gradual
It's very
insanity.
subtle.
But again,
Right.
that kind of lends itself to contrast.
Right.
Because one was obviously very much a slow burn, whereas she was thrust into it. Almost like she didn't have control. It was just, she was shoved, for lack of a better word,
Right.
into that state of manic psychosis.
Well, and
Feral.
Yeah.
You'll remember it broke her down though through indirect action because it had the kids see the woman with her father,
Right.
with their father, her husband, which sort of put her in a vulnerable state. As it progressed, she became more and more vulnerable. She felt more and more alone. So I think that just opened her up to be more easily taken by the mirror.
And that honestly, that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
It absolutely seems like the best explanation.
Yeah.
We have given many pros to this movie. I have only one con I can think of.
We need to hear it because we've been talking too much good
I
stuff.
have a feeling I know what it's
Too much
gonna
good
be.
stuff.
If you do, I want to know if you're right, because...
I'll let you know.
Okay. The fucking dog.
Oh, no.
No?
That's not what I thought it was. All right.
Okay.
Let's move forward.
No, this was fucking dumb. The fact that if the dog's too close to the mirror for too long, it just eats it.
Yeah, where did the dog go?
Yeah, it's
Why
like...
didn't they?
Why
find
there wasn't
corpse?
just a body? Yeah, like it sucked the life out of the plants, but the plants just didn't disappear.
They were just...
you're right.
Yeah,
I
so
never thought of
why
that.
wouldn't the dog just collapse and
Why
die?
wouldn't there be like a husk, like a withered?
Yeah.
Not that I would want to see that because I hate seeing
Right,
dogs die.
but
in
it doesn't
films.
make any sense. Like,
But yeah.
did like something come out, take the
I
dog
feel
into
like-
the mirror?
Oh,
There
yeah.
was the end when like Katie Sackhoff reached out of the mirror and like
Right.
held her daughter.
Yeah.
But that was all an illusion.
Yeah,
but
that
it's like
was-
this dog actually
It just
fucking disappeared.
Did it just jump out
Because
a
it was
window?
trapped in the dad's office
Yeah.
for like an entire day, and then they went in.
I feel
No
like that's
dog.
one of those things where the director or the writer was like, it'd be really creepy. If the dog just disappeared, and people are like, yeah, that'd be really creepy, but they never really actually put
Yeah,
the
because
thought
the
into it.
rest of
Yeah.
the mirror's abilities were all like on a psychological level. This was pretty fucking physical.
Very physical. It was a very aggressive, vulgar display of power.
Right. And it's like, I didn't like that, because if you siphon off energy through, like, spiritual means, not physically, you don't
Well, if it
eat
can just
something.
make the dog disappear, why did it have to be so gradual with everyone else?
Right, why couldn't it just suck away?
Honestly, the way I see it is the dog was a plot device. It was just a kind of a way to move the story forward. Because if you remember correctly, there was the scene where Kaylee and Tim are arguing back and forth because Tim's trying to talk her down, saying, like, this isn't happening. What's actually happening is a psychological issue with you.
Parvovirus.
Right. Very,
Yeah.
very great explanation. But,
No, actually, it was a really good explanation.
But there's that whole scene where they're just they're arguing back and forth, and then she hears the sound of the dog barking, and she turns around, and she purposely did not name this dog. Because
No, she called it dog.
She called it dog because no emotional connection and all that. And she turns around and she yells, "Shut up, Mason."
Yeah, and Mason was the name of the family dog that disappeared.
And
Right.
so that's how I viewed the disappearance of the dog. It was that because she never got closure.
Right.
And had she gotten closure, she wouldn't have turned around and yelled, "Shut up, Mason."
That's fair, but I still feel like having the husk of the dog at least would not have killed
She
that
still wouldn't
moment.
have had a closure as to why it died.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
But
mean,
just disappearing completely doesn't make any sense to
I
me.
do have to agree with you on that point. I don't like that now that I think about it.
Because it's like, the mirror had no physical abilities. That's what was
That
its
was so
weakness.
scary about it.
Yeah, it was its biggest weakness was that it couldn't interact with the real world.
Right.
It only could fuck with people's minds and make them
And
interact
make them
on its
interact in the
behalf.
real world. Yeah.
So that made, I don't know, that really made me mad, because I was like, there's no reason you should be able to do this, but not do that to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I did not like that part.
one last thing I have to say before we wrap this up. I really liked the fact that it was done with a limited cast. There wasn't a lot.
I do want to ask,
Right.
like, what do you guys think about the acting in this movie?
I thought,
it was superb.
honestly, at first it seems like they're just kind of going through the motions.
I think any movie kind of
But-
feels like that when they're just getting started.
Right, because you don't really know the characters at that point.
Yeah.
So you're still kind of trying to get a feel for what they're doing. But overall, I think the acting was solid. Every actor kind of hit the mark of
Yeah.
the character.
The only one that I don't feel like... I mean, I don't want to say they gave a bad performance, because they didn't give but nobody gave a bad performance in this movie, but the only one that I felt like was
The
kind
dog.
of...
Lacking.
could have been replaced with just about anybody else, and it wouldn't really have made much of a difference, was probably Brenton Thwaites, who played Tim.
Yeah,
I
could
feel
see
like
that.
they could have put a number of actors in that role, and it wouldn't have suffered for it.
I
don't
disagree.
think he did a terrible job.
The most replaceable character was her fiance. He was in it for 5 seconds.
That wasn't acting. That was just the fact that he wasn't like written.
Yeah.
There wasn't much. He, like the dog, he was just a plot device.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think of the two of them, like Karen Gillan gave a really good performance. I think.
She was fantastic.
Yeah, because I think like her panicked, feverish, almost obsessive compulsion with this mirror, it was very well played.
And I think it's one of the things that stood out to me, at least, now that you've said that, is the fact that when she was explaining the history of the mirror, she started off at kind of a regular pace, like a conversational pace, and she slowly got more and more frantic. That's exactly how the story ended up too.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
So she started off because she knew what she had to do. She had been preparing for this for 12 years. She knew exactly what was going to happen. And then everything got thrown out the window, and everything was thrown into chaos.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really cool way to show like the parallel there between not just the dialogue and the story kind of wove together.
This film is very streamlined filmmaking. Like there is no fat to be trimmed from this movie.
Yes.
Like it is, everything has its place. Everything is where it should be. Nothing is over-explained. Nothing is overextended. It is just really well. All the time is really well used.
Yeah, I like that it was all basically within the house. There's a couple scenes that take place in like the doctor's office and the mental institution and
The warehouse.
the auction house, but
You made me realize something, though, just now. The kids, when they were around their mirror, like in the present time, turned more like their parents from the past. The mom was super frantic.
I had kind of talked about that while we were watching the movie, because there was a kind of parallel between the way the kids were acting in the present
and the way their parents
were acting in the past.
Because she became more frantic like her mom.
Exactly.
And he became kind of more calculating and like kind of looking at things in a different way.
Yeah. I would almost say that Tim became more like the mother, because when he realized that reality was kind of folding in on itself, he started to really panic.
Yeah.
Kaylee, on the other hand, was really obsessive in the same way that the father was obsessive about the mirror.
That could be true too.
I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, it really does.
It's not like really a 1-to-1 comparison,
right?
Which is good. Like,
because you can kind of see the comparison between father and son and mother and daughter, but you can also see the comparison between father and daughter and
mother.
Because in the beginning, he was really calculating, like, no, there's like this mental illness that we probably have because we're fucking crazy.
Because we experience so much trauma.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Oh, anyway, I think we should wrap this up with a new segment that we're going to do at the end of every episode. We didn't do it in the last episode because we hadn't thought of it yet, but we came up with this as a good episode ender.
Come on, give yourself credit. It was you.
Okay, I came up with it. Yeah, I came up with it.
Yeah, it was totally me. You're
at
right.
work. Yeah. But what it is I'm calling it Stabathon's body count. And so what it is, it's a real simple thing. It's just I want each and every one of us, all three of us, to give the movie our own individualized rating. Like however many out of 10 we give the movie, to kind of give our own personal rating of the film. And I think it's important that we all have our own individual rating, and we don't know what it is before we get into the discussion, because we talk a lot about the subjective nature of movies.
Of course.
I don't want any movie to have just one conglomerated, Stabathon rating. I don't want us to have, like, Stabathon collectively says this movie is a 6 out of 6, or 6 out of 10. I want us to show how we thought of this movie, what we thought of this movie individually, and for people at home to know that there is no right or wrong way to think about a movie. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't, and there's no other way to think of it. So what we do is, instead of stars, we don't count stars because we are Stabathon. We count dead bodies. Hence why this is called the Stabathon body count. So I want to start. We'll start with Will, and we'll move counterclockwise to me. And so I want to get your rating, Will. How many bodies out of 10?
Originally, I would say 10 out of 10. But you raised the point of the dog. And it could easily be written off as just a plot device, so I would say I'd still give it a solid 9 out of 10.
Okay.
I mean, I don't personally, this is just how I feel, I would never give any movie a 10 out of 10, I don't think.
Right.
I don't think any movie is perfect enough for a 10 out of 10.
But
that's your own personal, so I'm not going to beat that into you. So Steven, what did you think?
The way I work is the more flaws, the more the body count goes down. And since I only found one flaw, I only brought it down once, so it is a 9 out of 10.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I mean, I gave it an 8 out of 10.
You piece of shit.
Explain why. What was your...
No, the dead dog was definitely one thing. Like I said, I have a tough time giving a movie 10 out of 10. 9 out of 10 for me is also a special rating, because that, I think, is for movies. If I'm going to give my Stabathon body count for Nightmare on Elm Street, it's going to be a 9 out of 10. I can't give it a 10 out of 10 because I can find flaws in Nightmare on Elm Street, even though I love it so much. I'm probably going to rate most of the movies based on how they made me personally feel, how much I personally enjoyed them, not necessarily flaws. Like, you're more calculating in that matter. I'm more based on feeling. So I feel like it's a great movie. It's not an instant classic. It's not one that I'm going to, immediately run to. Around Halloween time, when I go to watch movies around Halloween, it's going to be Nightmare on Elm Street, The Shining, The Exorcist, Halloween, stuff like that I grew up with.
And I feel like it's also important to note that this isn't traditional horror. This is more of a psychological
it's very
thriller
different.
In a certain way.
Right. And
with
I mean,
horror elements.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't quite get myself to bring it to a 9 out of 10. I do have to take it down a notch for my own personal feeling. So I give it an 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 dead bodies.
All right. All right.
So, with that concludes another episode of Stabathon. I had an absolute fucking blast with this. Yeah. I know you guys did too.
Absolutely.
Once again, horror, it's in our blood. We love it. We hope you loved it. We hope you're enjoying yourselves. And hopefully we'll see you next time. Just stay scared, because it's the only thing that's going to save you. Bye.